Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow. We are back here for a special ITR Foundation Poll edition of the ITR Live podcast. How many times can I say ITR in the opening? And I think we've just discovered that. So I am joined here today with Victoria Sinclair with Iowans for Tax Relief and everyone's favorite John Hendrickson with ITR Foundation. So it's another one of those days here in the office when the internet's down. So we're going to fill the time with podcasting. So John, if you weren't podcasting, how would you be how would you be spending your time here?
I was actually just reading an article on national conservatism.
Well, perfect. I love it. And I hope you'll be sharing that with me as soon as the internet's back, right? Okay. Victoria, I wanted to, here's something that we were debating earlier. Well, not you and I, but Halloween trick-or-treating. Is that in you live in Boone?
Yeah.
Is that tonight or is that okay?
Yeah, tonight.
For some strange reason in central Iowa, it's done. We have Beggars Night, and I've never been able to quite figure out why. I'm sure one of the Des Moines old timers can tell me. We did it last night, and I couldn't remember a warmer evening to go out with the kids. My daughter was in bare feet last night doing trick or treating, but anyway, a truly obnoxious amount of candy that they pulled out. It was.
I didn't have anybody. That's why I brought in all that candy.
Well, and I
this
appreciate
morning.
it because, John, you're the only one that brings in Baby Ruth. And, there's hardly any in the kids' bags. And it's, I don't know, favorite Halloween candy, Victoria?
It's got to be Reese's, honestly. Yeah. And it's perfect because I got a kid who's allergic to peanuts, so I can steal all of his Reese's, and he doesn't even complain. It works out. Favorite Halloween candy, John?
That's hard. I like the... Is it the 100 grand or the 1,000 grand? Yeah, those are.
That's a strong pick. I appreciate that. So, anyway, so the reason we're here today is we decided to again one more time before the election do the ITR Foundation poll, and we've had very similar results all along. Is that this is going to be a tremendous environment for not just Republicans but conservatives, and we've talked about that, but. Our last poll, we saw the Des Moines Register's poll, which by many is seen as the gold standard in polling, especially in Iowa. And we had some different numbers, so we thought we'd go in and check one last time. And Victoria, I'm going to go to you just on some of these top line numbers. Where are we at?
So this survey came in a little bit softer than our last one, but we're still seeing a massive red wave, even compared to the Seltzer numbers. So somebody's wrong, and I guess we're going to find out in about a week. But it looks like the red wave's still on, big time.
And you mentioned that. I think that's right. The red wave is on. There are, ours were about 2 points across the board, maybe less than the last one, which is most likely statistical. I don't want to call it statistical noise, but you talk about margin of error on a poll, and on ours it's just under 4%. So a move up and down is. You don't get alarmed by that, especially when you see polls across the country, and in Iowa, it seems to be moving to the right here at the very end. So we had in our poll, we start out with the generic congressional ballot and ask a voter, if the election were held today, would you vote for a Republican or a Democrat? No names, just to get a sense of where the environment is at. And if my notes here, we had that as plus 14 for Republicans, right? And then going on, we then do ask 3 specific ballot tests by name. We asked the governor's race, the Senate race, and the attorney general's race. And do you have those right there? Because I only have the full giant, crosstab sheet.
Yep, the governor's up still in our poll. Math is... sometimes hard. 16 points.
I had it as 19.
19?
Yeah. And then okay.
No.
Oh, you're looking at the image ratings.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't flip my pages. No, that's all right.
But
yeah, here we go. Yep, 19 points.
So she's up 19, 5 points ahead of the generic ballot. And then moving on to the U.S. Senate.
And this is the one that really interests me.
Yeah.
Because it's...
Yeah, and I agree.
So Seltzer had this coming in when she released her poll for the Register, 46-43 split for Grassley-Franken. So Grassley had 3 points on Franken. Our poll has him up much more than that.
Yeah.
We have him just shy of 54% and Franken at 42.7. So, I mean, you're looking at, almost a 12-point gap.
And I think in there is the spread between the governor and Senator Grassley. And that's what I want to look at is, if one poll is more to the right or the left than the other, that's to be expected. But the last Des Moines Register poll had an almost unbelievable number of voters that were going to go vote for Kim Reynolds and then Mike Franken. And ours seems to be a little bit more in that. I mean, you have a 19 for the governor and 11 for Senator Grassley. That seems much more in line with what we've seen other places. John, are you voting for Kim Reynolds?
I am, yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
So, not to just, keep beating the drum, but I want to point out here that conservative Governor Kim Reynolds is overperforming the generic ballot as a conservative leader. And
I think that's right. I mean, you look at these numbers that really in our poll and other polls that have showed her very popular among Iowans, and I think she has been able to, and we've talked about this a lot of times on the program, but just her conservative policies, whether they're the sound tax policies, the social policies, Iowans are really supportive of this governor, and she also has national appeal as well. So I'm not surprised by these numbers with Governor Reynolds. In fact, I think it just shows that conservative leadership pays off, and she's leading. I mean, literally just advancing, what we'd call conservative common values in Iowa.
Victoria, you got anything else to add kind of on that? I want to move on to also the third race we tested was the Attorney General ballot, because that has been very close all along, and that's between longtime incumbent Democrat Tom Miller and Republican challenger Brenna Bird. And we've had that race is tied, Brenna up a few points. In this one, she's down a couple. Does that
Yep.
sound right? Okay. Again, it just seems to be bouncing around that number. Does that, we talked about those spreads from the Des Moines Register, but that one was even more significant on the Attorney General's race. They had Brenna down an almost unbelievable number.
Insurmountable
Right.
in the Seltzer poll, yeah.
So these all seem to be a little more tightly grouped of people with a little bit more, if you're voting Republican at the top of the ticket, you're much more likely to vote Republican down the ticket and vice versa. So, and I think the big picture is, and you've got the historical stuff there too, Victoria, but these all seem to be tracking about the same way. Brenna's number, we've done this poll 4 times with her in it, and her numbers are, 46, 44, 46, 44, and this is a very tight race, right? But we still believe this is competitive, correct?
I would say so, and I would. I think the commercials that the Bird campaign has been running have been highly effective.
Yeah.
And so I think she has made this a very competitive race. And I guess one question I have for both of you, kind of as being veteran political observers, is how will the down ballot, the coattails of Governor Reynolds, help candidates such as Bird, as well as the Republicans running for treasurer and auditor, or are we going to see the power of incumbency break for the Democrats in those offices already?
Historically, Iowans love their incumbents. And I mean, look, there's one on the ballot with Senator Grassley who keeps winning. And Iowans are, and I've said this before in this podcast, I don't care what any poll says. Iowans know Chuck Grassley, and they are going to vote for him, a week from tomorrow.
If you haven't met Chuck Grassley, that's on you.
Yeah, it's on you, right? I mean, frankly, Kim Reynolds is turning into that as well. She's everywhere. But to your point about the coattails, John, and I think that's one of the things that we really need to watch and find out. You're seeing, I think, Governor Reynolds engaging in down ballot races in a way I've never seen a governor do, especially in Iowa. And I can't speak to having a lot of experience around the country, but she is actively not just campaigning for, but lending her name to their paid media to help get these folks across the finish line. And that is not something that every governor does for the rest of their party. And I think it's to her credit that she really does care about the rest of the ticket. There's one number that really jumped out at me, for those that aren't poll junkies, that's the crosstabs, right? It's the next level of statistical analysis. But if you take going back to the Attorney General's race, if you take the group of voters, there were 11% of the poll respondents who had not yet made up their mind on the Attorney General's race. That 11% of the voters is breaking 6-1 voting for Kim Reynolds. So, and then there's still that other little fragment that just hasn't made up their mind on anything, which I have not personally met any of those people. I'm sure they're out there, but 6-1 that the Attorney General undecideds are voting for Kim Reynolds. Well, that leads me to believe that if they haven't yet made up their mind for Tom Miller, they're probably leaning pretty strongly for Brenna. So, she just needs to get her message out there. And I guess, frankly, I still think she has a very strong chance at winning this race. And so I don't want to be completely dismissive of anybody else's poll, especially one that's as celebrated as Ann Seltzer. But every other data point except for their poll shows that is absolutely a toss-up winnable race for Brenna Bird. Agree, or if
agree.
I'm just dreaming on it, because I have a tendency to get a little optimistic this time of year on election polling stuff.
I mean, I could be wrong, but this election cycle for Attorney General, I have not seen before where there's been so many ads on both sides for this, and I think that's telling us it's going to be very competitive and very, very close.
That race has drawn a lot of national attention from national groups on both sides of the aisle.
Well, and frankly, I think Brenna Bird hit the ground running with a full campaign, and Tom Miller should have hit the ground running with a full campaign, but I think he was kind of going back and forth on even running again. I mean, the man's been in office for well longer than I've been alive, and that says something. But you kind of take things for granted, I think, after a certain amount of time, and I think that's kind of where he was at. So when he got a serious challenger, I don't think he was quite ready, and I think that's now.
Well, let's not forget that Tom Miller almost didn't get the required signatures to even be on the ballot and was nearly struck off of the ballot altogether. John, you wanted to make another point.
Well, we didn't poll on these other races, but do you guys have a sense on the auditor and treasurer's race, how those might break?
I don't. You've got Democrat incumbents in both of those seats. Now, they're both going to operate a little bit differently. I know that for the state treasurer race, Robbie Smith, you have a state senator who I believe is outspending the Democrat incumbent on that, so that could work differently. The auditor's race, again, is incumbent Democrat Rob Sand, who is spending a lot of money on TV, and that stuff does matter and it does work. So I've kind of set myself out there, John, last week that I think Republicans are going to sweep it all. But I also, as I conceded just a minute ago, I start believing what I want to believe on some of these races at the very end, and I'll concede that. But we're capped at the number of questions we can ask in the poll. It'd be great to know that. But the one down ballot race we did ask in the previous poll earlier in October was the Secretary of Agriculture race, where we had Republican Mike Naig up, I think, over 20 points in that race. So go ahead.
I couldn't even tell you who I'm embarrassed to admit, I don't even know who the Democrat is running for Secretary of Agriculture.
It's John Norwood.
Okay.
And I don't think he has done a lot to get his name out. But anyway, that's that. we didn't, I don't want to, we could talk crosstabs all day on this, and the podcast would quickly devolve into something that I don't think too many people outside of this office would care a lot about. We did ask one issue sort of question, which is, what is voters' top issue? And this has been fairly steady, at least since we pulled this in July, right after the Dobbs decision. But what is the number one issue on the minds of Iowa voters? Victoria, I know you've got that right in front of you. So
yeah, it's inflation and the cost of living. You got 32.3% of respondents answering that way. I mean, it's facing everyone every day, right? You go to the grocery store, you fill up your car. Every single day there's something that's hitting you that's costing you more. And I think Iowans are truly feeling that.
Yeah, I agree. John, you...
Absolutely. As Victoria said, people are seeing that firsthand. Gas station, grocery store, rising cost of utilities and heating. And this is a big issue. I think the economy is front and center for a lot of voters.
Yeah, and now, we've got the prospect of a diesel fuel shortage.
Yeah.
And so it's supply chain, which then impacts inflation, and costs just keep going up and up. And that is something that impacts every individual on a daily basis. And it is front and center. And number two, which has actually gone down a little bit in importance, especially since the July poll, is abortion rights. And that's still number two. There's still a lot of folks that are focused on that, but inflation just keeps creeping up and up as more and more people, come to grips with what's going on in our economy.
Well, and so not to try to dismiss that piece, but the third most important issue is pro-life and family values. Correct. In our poll. So, I mean, I wonder how those people would answer if that option weren't there, if they would go with the economy potentially, because these are obviously not folks looking at the reproductive right piece. They're on the other end of that spectrum.
We tried to phrase it to get those folks, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, to move into those two buckets.
Right. And so that was number three.
Yeah.
So I think that you're seeing strong conservative tendencies here.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. It looks like, last time I'm going to talk about crosstabs, these undecided voters or the lean voters are leaning to the right. There was another thing that I promised I wouldn't get this far into it, but here we are. But we also try and analyze someone's likelihood to vote based on their vote history. And one other thing that you'll see in this is the folks that don't vote as often are the one area where Democrats seem to be doing a little bit better. Reliable voters are the ones that are voting Republican in this poll. So I think the one thing that's really hard to capture with a poll is who's going to actually show up and vote. And that's really, and I think I'll try and land the plane here for this episode. And we'll talk about this again. I know, Victoria, we talked about coming on and doing sort of an election preview episode of this, but that's where you come down to, are your friends and neighbors showing up to vote? Who's going to be there? John, so here's your chance to give a pitch for showing up and vote for Kim Reynolds and conservative candidates up and down the ballot.
I will be voting for sure, and Saturday I talked to my neighbor, and they're voting, and so I think there's a lot of people who are excited to vote. Yeah. And I've talked to people in other states who are the same way.
Yeah.
So
I think that's right. And as one of my other favorite podcasters says, the red wave is not something that's happening; it's something we are doing. So anyway,
this is also a big week in Iowa politics because former President Trump is coming.
That's right.
To hold a rally in Sioux City.
Right.
I think on Wednesday or Thursday, I forget which day, but going to hold a rally for Governor Reynolds and Senator Grassley. So
well, and if you live on Twitter, or you will see Democrats wondering, is that going to help or hurt, right? And whatever you think of President Trump, the 2 years that he's been on the ballot in Iowa have been really good years for Republicans. So I'm not at all dismissive of the value of having President Trump come into a rally to get Republicans turned out to vote.
Well, and the other piece we're missing here too is the Second Amendment question on the
Yes.
ballot. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be helping drive voter turnout, likely for more conservative voters too. So
Yep.
you've got another group that isn't always as involved, that's very much involved this time, helping drive turnout. So I think it's going to be big, and I'm hoping everything breaks red. I really, that's what I feel, but I could be too optimistic
Yep.
too.
Well, it's easy, especially in an environment like this, to do that. Oh,
The real question here, though, is the attorney general race.
Right.
I think,
I
and
think
that's
that's right.
and that's the thing that's really up in the air. So if you care about this race, you should honestly talk to your friends and neighbors about that race too. If you care about having an attorney general that represents your values and your state as a whole, so we don't have to have the governor doing over what I would consider to be an unlawful use of power out of the president in forgiving student loan
That's right.
debt by paying for it with all of our folks who couldn't afford to go to college or chose to go straight to the workforce. They're the ones paying for this. And Tom Miller wouldn't sign on to that.
Yeah. I think that's all correct. And going back also to the Second Amendment rights question is, do you have an attorney general that's going to be there protecting those rights with the from the state level? So that's great. Victoria, I appreciate it. John, you're appreciated as always. The ITR Live listeners, it's just not the same without you here. So Victoria and I, for sure, are going to be back with our election preview. You know, we talked with Senator Whitver a while back about some of the Senate races. We'll come back and look at some House races and some other stuff and give you an idea of where some of those battleground races lie. And I'm going to make Victoria give her prediction as well. So anyway, with that, appreciate you joining us. Don't forget to give a 5-star review, like and subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. And with that, we will see you next time.